5 years ago, I started hormone replacement therapy, and before I get into any of the content here, I want to just note that I am happy. I am really, really happy with the fact that I am where I am now compared to where I was, and the changes on hormone replacement therapy. They definitely could be better, but I am happy that I have made it this far, that I have succeeded in getting to this point. That said, this video is going to discuss the changes that I've experienced on hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, over the past 5 years, with a focus on the last 3, as I've already covered the first 2 in video content previously. The most important place to start are the mental changes. This is things like my mental health, my self-image, and my libido. These are all important to cover because they all change on hormone replacement therapy. They're all part of the human experience, and to not do so would be disingenuous to a proper overall discussion of how hormone replacement therapy can affect people and has affected at least one person. Generally, it's easiest to say that on hormone replacement therapy, my mental health has improved significantly. I now am able to focus on other aspects of my lived mental ill health experience, such as my depression, my anxiety, which includes my social anxiety, and my OCD. Now that I'm not pursuing hormone replacement therapy because I have it, I have been able to focus on those experiences and really try to rein them in, change my behavior, and just recognize my behavior in general. The hormone replacement therapy has been good for sort of clearing my mind in a general sort of sense. Now, it would be inaccurate to say that my mental health has just skyrocketed with no pitfalls or anything like that. There have been difficulties, but they are not because of hormone replacement therapy. I have had panic attacks. I have had other unfortunate elements of mental ill health come up in my life. But with hormone replacement therapy, I am able to address them more accurately because I don't need to put those mental energies elsewhere. Speaking specifically on my sense of self and my self-image since starting hormone replacement therapy, I have improved significantly. And I say that because I now still struggle to think about myself before hormone replacement therapy in terms of how I felt mentally, because I was not in a good place. Now I am in a much better place. I still struggle with self-image a lot, but generally my sense of self is much, much better. So when I talk about my self-image issues, I still see myself having features that I do not want, I do not like. These are things like maybe the size of my nose, or the fact that I've got a tiny bit of an Adam's apple, my proportions, and those sorts of things. What I've found has been really, really important and helpful for me is that sort of, this is my body, this is what I have, I'm going to try to make the most of it, because there is nothing like hormone replacement therapy that can fix those areas. And I use fix loosely. It's just sort of my language from my experience. But additionally, what has helped has been that sort of acceptance or neutrality, or trying to make it about my happiness. Rather than just buying stuff that fits, which can be a little bit of a hassle because of my slightly strange proportions, and we'll get into what those are specifically later on. I have been able to sort of celebrate my body, sort of focus on, yes, I've got, say, XYZ genitalia, so I'm going to only purchase underwear that fits that, but Also, I'm not gonna just buy the cheapest stuff anymore. I'm gonna buy stuff that looks nice and makes me feel nice. Um, that is where my mental image of myself has sort of blossomed. So, for example, I now purchase things that just make me feel celebrated, that fit me and make me feel good when I wear them. I think that's a really, really important thing. As much as I live off op shopping, it's nice to be able to just go out and get something maybe expensive that is going to last me a long time and is going to do wonders for my self image when I wear it. So that's all externally based and sourced body image positivity. But internally, there has been a lot to talk about that is actually positive for me as well. So I talked about what body parts of mine that I don't like, but generally I'm happy with my appearance. Um, it may not be my sort of goal, but generally it'll do. It's very much I've taken what I can get. I absolutely adore my hair. I adore my butt. My legs are alright. Um, it's really weird to sort of talk yourself up when for years and years you've had these body image issues. I like my boobs, they're nice. Um, I'm still a little iffy on my general chest proportions, but generally when I look in the mirror, I don't despise myself, which is the opposite of how I was prior to hormone replacement therapy and even some points during in the first couple of years while changes were still coming in. I try not to look at photos of myself in the early years of transition because they're just not me now and they're not representative, and I can almost empathize in the sadness I felt. So generally, I'm great. I am happy with how I look. Um, it'll do, like I said, it'll do. And I am excited to just be able to continue celebrating the parts about myself that I really, really like. With general discussion of my mental health and my self image aside, it's now important to focus on the sexual elements of how hormone replacement therapy has affected me mentally. I am now certain, more or less, of my sexuality because, like with my mental health, I've been able to think about it because I haven't been having to deal with issues of my gender. I now identify as pansexual demiromantic, and this is a whole story in of itself that I might cover at some point, but generally that is how I identify now, and I feel much more confident in that label than I ever did previously with any other label. Also, it's important to note that I don't feel controlled by lust or libido or anything like that now. Previously, on when I was a testosterone fueled being, I felt like I was sort of forced into arousal. Like, if I felt arousal, I was aroused. It was very much a sort of fog that you couldn't really pass through. Think Barovia from Curse of Strahd. So you were very much sort of trapped within the confines of what this fog allowed you to do. Now, arousal is very much easy to deal with, in the sense mentally, if it's not the time, and generally I don't feel aroused if it's like I don't get random arousal generally, um, it's easy to deal with. There is basically no problem there. I feel really, really, really confident in my arousal. So when I am aroused, I know it and I can shut that down if I need to. But generally, I don't because it doesn't come up in otherwise unfortunate areas like it did on testosterone. It's very much a controllable thing, and it's very much more a pleasant sort of general mental space as opposed to a fueling sort of drive. The one downside has been external arousal. This has been a source of genital dysphoria for me, especially with partners. So, as a trans woman who has not had any reconstructive surgery on her external genitalia, I will still experience erections. These can be frustrating and hurt me mentally. Sometimes it's okay, but a lot of the time I feel really uncomfortable experiencing them. And thus, when I am with a partner, we have to have that conversation on don't look at my genitalia, don't touch it, just pretend it's not there, just let the rest of the scene play out, but do not focus on that area because it can be a source of mental distress for me. And that's really important to know. It doesn't all go away. Like, not all dysphoria goes away once you're on hormone replacement therapy. And a lot of it can occur in spaces that you don't want it to occur. Well, I mean, generally it always occurs in spaces you don't want it to occur, but in spaces that are meant to be pleasant, enjoyable sort of areas of your life where you're meant to be having a good time. Generally, I manage. Um, like I said, I have those discussions with partners. I make sure I'm in a space where I feel safe, but it can still be frustrating to experience things like erections and any other form of physical arousal that may present in that region. Speaking more broadly on my experiences with sex and sexuality, I am now much more of a sensual being. This is in part thanks to hormone replacement therapy's physical effects, which has resulted in softer and more sensitive skin. This change has allowed me to recognize and receive sensual touch much more easily than when I was testosterone fueled. Additionally, when it comes to the experience of sexual contact, I am much more about the experience itself, the touch, the way the scene goes, as opposed to achieving an orgasm and being done with the entire scenario, which was very much the case previously. I'm now very much more focused on the experience of it all and all those little feelings and enjoyments on the way. The physical changes I've experienced on hormone replacement therapy are numerous and quite extensive. Previously, I was effectively like a thin box of a person. Now I have much more shape to me. My shoulders are much more narrow than they were. I have a lot less muscle. My hips are wider, and my legs, they might be longer. I'm not sure, but they definitely look better than they did prior to estrogen. This is not an extensive list of all the physical changes, however. Things like fat redistributions are major changes that have occurred. So I now get more fat distribution in my thighs, which now have stretch marks from the growth, my butt, and my cheeks have a little extra padding to them. Additionally, my skin is much clearer. I did say it was softer and more sensitive, but on estrogen, it's been much, much softer than it ever was on testosterone. And additionally, I don't get acne nearly as often. I might get an ingrown hair or two, especially after electrolysis, but generally, unless I eat a whole bunch of junk food, I will not get things like acne on my face or any other body part. Then we've got things like smell. Apparently, I don't smell as a person. I guess I'm just good at showering, but also just not much of a sweater, unless it's hella hot outside. And it's moving into summer now, so we'll see how that goes. But I don't have much of a scent to me, though people like sniffing my hair, which is a bit weird. Um, and generally, I don't think I'm a very smelly person. But then again, I do have issues smelling things properly and just general sinus issues. So I'm not the best judge, though I have asked people, and they generally speak as though I don't have a smell or a scent to me, which is important to note because previously I would get sweatier a lot quicker, and it would be a relatively unpleasant experience because you have to face the reality that you smell. whereas now I can get away with showering for more sparsely without, stinking out someone's house. Hair growth has slowed down significantly, though I still have some dark hair around my upper lip and my chin. I am no longer nearly as hairy as I was. And when I shave, it takes longer for hair to come back. And this is across my body. So we're talking about my legs, my genital region, my face, which I do very rarely because I generally just have very clear, fine hair, except for here, which I do about once weekly because the hair is a little thicker and blacker there. This chin region I generally leave for electrolysis and experienced, I've experienced less hair growth, thinner hair growth as a result of that in combination with hormone replacement therapy. Generally, hair is it's one of my more dysphoric areas, especially around here. Um, but it's also much better than it was. So I'm taking what I can get generally, especially when the only hair I really want to grow that much is this. It's been very positive to be able to focus on the length that I have, which at maximum has been almost 2 feet in length. It's not quite there right now, but it's grown a lot, especially over the last 6 years that I've been growing it. There was an entire year where I didn't cut it at all. That was because I was overseas and just never had the time to. Um, but generally, it has grown quite fast, whereas the rest of the areas have slowed down or not developed further black hair at all. As may be evident if you compare my 2 years on HRT log and my HRT log now, you may see less in the way of muscle. I have definitely experienced a lot of muscle loss since I started hormone replacement therapy, though that is not to say I had a whole lot before that. I've always been very skinny, so I really noticed when my muscle composition sort of lessened in its existence. And that has been a positive effect for me because I don't need my muscle that much. Of course, it's always good to have muscle, and I really should work out, but it adds to the sort of feminine profile that I really want and really feel comfortable with. And so I'm really happy with that change in that regard. This is not just like my arms, this is also on my legs and such, though not to as great an extent on my legs as on my arms. Then we've got things like genital physical changes there. I have shrunk significantly, just generally in that area. Um, my scrotum is much smaller than it was, my testes are much smaller than they were, and my penis is much smaller. When erect, it's probably 3 to 4 inches at worst, and half the time I won't get erections even if I'm aroused, which I should have mentioned earlier, but it's very much a hit or miss with me. And that's fine because I do not penetrate, I do not feel comfortable penetrating, and so having something small that's almost ignorable is much more of a pleasant experience for me. And additionally, when I'm wearing any sort of clothes, it makes that area stick out less. Literally, I experienced like maybe a small bulge at the worst of times. And personally, I think that's a cool look. Um, but also, it's like, it can be a little dysphoric for me. So I would like it to be smaller still, but I may just have to go for an operation, a reconstructive surgery in that sort of area to really get the results that I'm seeking. Also, with my testes, I have on hormone replacement therapy experienced 2 testicular cysts. Uh, well, actually, they were on the epididymis, but in that sort of area. The first one and the second occurred during my 2 to 3 year HRT experience. Um, so I was overseas during that period, and I had to go through the American medical system to get them checked out. And it was very slow, it was a bit costly, and I'm just generally not a fan of how that went. So when I came back from America, I got that region checked out. They're benign, but be aware that these things may occur to just anyone who has testes, and it's really important to check. Um, and when you're on hormone replacement therapy and that area is shrinking, it can cause a little bit of physical pain as the cyst is trying to be retracted, or the epididymis is, with the cyst is trying to be retracted up, and then you're feeling the cyst press against your inguinal canals, and that's not a pleasant experience at all. It's also going to be a little confronting for some people, but to discuss the composition of my discharge down there in a sexual context is important to note because it's very different to my experience prior to estrogen. Um, a lot of people may be experienced with sperm being thick, bitter, and sort of comes out in like 6 spurts or something. When I orgasm, it doesn't come out at all generally. It will make its way up through the penis, but it'll probably about end there. So effectively, my orgasms are relatively dry with minimal fluid that comes out. And when that fluid does come out, it is sweet in terms of, I guess, taste profile, which is a controversial thing to mention. And I'm not going to mention how I know that, but there is no bitterness to it. It tastes, if anything, more like snot, which is pretty gross, but it's more of an accurate representation. And I think it's something that needs to be discussed more because if we shy away from these conversations, we aren't getting accurate pictures and we're not representing transsexual health accurately. Moving to a non-sexual element of the physical changes that are often regarded as sexual changes due to society's concerns and beliefs, my breasts. They have continued to grow over the course of these last 5 years, and if I was good at getting regular food intake, they would probably be bigger than they are. But at present, they are about an A. Generally, I wear something like a 10A or a 34A when it comes to bras, though given there are so many companies and so many companies do their sizings differently, that can be anywhere from like a 32 or an 8A to a 10A. Generally, I'm not particularly gifted down there, and through luxury lingerie have I only been able to get things like cleavage or really low-cut tops with push-up bras. Otherwise, it's just a pair of breasts on a chest, as opposed to anything that is super significant. They still appear on my profile, my physical profile, but they aren't large by any means. I'd now like to focus on some of the changes that I have missed in the other sections, or that are just miscellaneous in nature. Going back to genitalia changes, erections are softer now. I generally cannot reach a quote-unquote full hardness. Instead, it's somewhat soft and it can be painful to experience an erection because of the atrophy that has occurred to that region. It generally means that I'm not experiencing erections as much, but that's also in combination with a lot of other hormone replacement therapy changes. Additionally, I'd like to go back to mental health, where my anxiety and my social anxiety cause me to dress slightly in ways that are focused on protecting myself from being called slurs or being harassed just generally or gaining any attention. I still get some stares in public, and I don't know why. they're very uncomfortable to experience, and a lot of the time my mental faculties just go into they know, um, what's Majig? This hurts. This is scary. Mentally hurts. It's mentally painful to feel like other people uh, know that I'm trans and thus my act. I'm afraid of the transphobia, not just being trans. Being trans could be fine, but the possible transphobia that I might experience, that's what I fear, and that causes a lot of mental anguish. I should also know exactly what medications I take. In my case, for my anti-androgen, I take Spiractin. I'm not sure how well that's going to show up with the light, but I take 2 100 milligram tablets a day with water, though I've learned that I can swallow without, so I'm pretty proud of myself in that. And then I consume or take sublingually um, Zumanon, 2 milligrams in the morning, 2 milligrams at night. When it comes to other medications that aren't hormone replacement therapy related, I take Zactin, which is a fluoxetine, 20 milligrams in the morning. So that's 100 milligrams of Spiractin, spironolactone, 100 morning, 100 night, 2 milligrams morning, 2 milligrams night, taken sublingually for the Zumanon or estradiol, and for the Zactin or fluoxetine, 20 milligrams in the morning. This has been my regimen rather, for the most of the last 5 years. Though I have done things like, or when I first started hormone replacement therapy, I was only on like 100 or 150 of the Spiractin and only one Zumanon a day. But that was generally because they wanted to bring me onto it slowly. And additionally, the medical system here, because we only have 3 psychiatrists who are willing to see trans people, and most of them won't because their wait lists are too long. It's very conservative, and we don't have a lot in the way of injections or patches here. They're definitely not as prevalent as in some other areas, and I think that's disgusting. I think it's disgusting that we have only 3 psychiatrists who openly will see trans patients. I think it's disgusting that we're making trans people in our state, and indeed the rest of Australia, prove that we are stable enough to access hormone replacement therapy, and while they're trying to ascertain if we're stable enough, they aren't giving us anti-androgens, which have easily reversible effects. I know that's a bit of a rant, but this is the thing that kept me from hormone replacement therapy for 8 to 10 months when I was at my weakest as a person, or maybe my strongest, it could be argued, when I really, really needed that medical intervention, and I was not provided it. Instead, I was forced to pay extensive fees, and I was forced to put up with a family that at the time was not supportive, and thus take on that financial burden where I could. And when you're a young person trying to seek help, especially when it comes to seeking help with gender dysphoria, you need to be able to access your treatment immediately. Thankfully, things like informed consent are coming out. I was not fortunate enough to be able to use that, and I'm so glad that it's a thing now in WA, and that people can access it, even if it is a little difficult. I say a little difficult, it's quite difficult to access. It's infinitely better than the system I went through. The system I went through is still in place. It is still disgusting. I'm doing my best to help deconstruct it and implement a better thing in the WA sort of scene and the legal framework. But it's slow work, and while this is happening, there are people who are having experiences like I did at 17 and 18 who should not be having that experience. It could have been much worse, but it should have been better. And this is the sort of focus we really need to pay politically to the sort of trans quote unquote debate. Instead of focusing on our muscle mass or how there are all these ridiculous ideas about us that are scientifically untrue, we need to focus on helping younger trans people and younger gender diverse people and anyone who has these sorts of needs around gender dysphoria, um, or lack thereof. We just need to be better. And sure, I generally feel I look okay, like hormone replacement therapy did well by me. The fact that I now have to see I have to receive electrolysis to deal with any hair that I gained during that period, when coming out and then seeking help and then all the way to actually receiving even this. It's disgusting. I should not have to have done that. No one should have had to do that kind of thing. Help needs to be more available more quickly. Um, and this is important to mention in the HRT log because it's not like hormone replacement therapy is not taken in isolation. There are social factors that are going on. This is just a treatment, to an extensive problem, and the way the treatment was given is quite frankly unacceptable. Um, I have significant issues with the system, as you may have heard. Um, and again, I do some work around that to try and educate and help change that system. But ultimately, I can't do it alone. And there are lots of people fighting, but awareness does still need to be raised, or still needs to be raised, rather. And I don't believe we're at a stage that is acceptable for people who are seeking hormone replacement therapy yet. The fact that we are denied medical intervention until we can prove it is pretty damn, again, disgusting. And it's important to mention all this because previously in my 2-year HRT log, I did not really go into the system, and the political underpinnings that sort of drove my journey into receiving hormone replacement therapy. 3 years later from that, I have now been more involved in the system. I now have the hindsight to be able to say, hey, paying $40 to $48 just to have my gender recognized by a bunch of people who convened when they wanted to, and this is not hyperbole, it's not an okay experience to have. Like, sure, at the time I might have been grateful that they allowed me to be recognized as female in my gender, but now I recognize it's total trash. It's disgusting that we have a gender reassignment board. This hindsight is really, really important because those first 2 years, though they may feel long, you may interpret some things differently to how you will once you have been on HRT for a significant amount of time, like I have. This is the entirety of my adult life, basically. I went on HRT when I was 18. I am 23 as of this video. That's 5 years. I spent less than the first year of my adulthood on testosterone, and it still wreaked havoc, or wrought havoc. And I'm now just an adult who has been able to make it this far on HRT and be stable and overcome all those expectations. And now I'm trying to make the world, and at least my area, a better place. And I think I have a responsibility to do that, being out, and being openly sort of in the public sphere. So yeah, that's my rant. So thank you for listening through a rant and just the rest of this log. It's really important to disseminate this information. A lot of people still say, oh, you're a trans? And that's just not correct language. A trans person, never just say a trans. Just by the by, in case you didn't know that. What I'm saying is there's a whole bunch of misinformation or lack of information, and it's important for me to speak about my specific experience to say, hey, look, this is actually how things are, as opposed to a general sort of ally system that doesn't really go into what the changes actually are and how trans people actually speak about it. Um, the language I use for it is common for a lot of these changes, um, is indicative of how the wider sort of community of trans people and medical professionals who are actually professionals um, discuss it. Um, but a lot of people don't know that terminology because we are a minority that gets murdered on a daily basis, or semi-daily basis. Though I live in, I guess, what is kind of an accepting space physically, I am still at risk of murder, of being beaten up. The fact that I let my anxiety take hold and dress differently so I don't stand out, so that I don't celebrate my existence, is a sign of that. It's self-defense, and I should not have to face that, and nor should any other trans person. The reality is, no matter where we are still at risk because of the transphobia, because people don't understand the language. I've definitely done a lot of work around educating on language in my professional experiences, and it's probably one of the biggest areas you can make the change. So thank you for listening to this, because it does help you learn more about the language and the reality of the situation, as opposed to an abstract concept of what trans people are, how trans people act, and ultimately whether or not we take hormone replacement therapy. We're valid either way, and I don't think that a video like this should be taken in the way that someone thinks every trans person should take hormone replacement therapy. It's not for everyone. It is for me, and that's what this video is about. It's about my experience and getting that out there and helping with the language. So again, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks again for listening through the rants. I hope this has been educational. I am so happy that I have reached 5 years on hormone replacement therapy. I've achieved a lot in that time. I'm really, really proud of myself. As much as I have struggles mentally, I am generally in a good place, and I would not be in that good place without HRT. So yeah, I've done my bit. I do the best I can, and just I hope this has been really educational in a way that makes you think and teaches you in a relatable way about what HRT might or might not do to you. So have a great day or night. For insomniacs or anyone up past 8, best of luck. Don't die.